All right, welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are tackling something that's absolutely central to the lives of millions, especially in Vietnamese culture. But it's a topic that rarely gets discussed with, the kind of psychological depth it deserves.
We're talking about Ho Thom.
Exactly. We know it as filial piety, but for this deep dive, we're going much, much deeper. We're using our sources to really unpack this huge tension between an ancient foundational tradition and, the modern world's demand for individual freedom.
And this is such a critical conversation because, as the sources point out, Ho Thom often starts out feeling like a very gentle thing. It feels like love, like gratitude and respect.
Like a gentle raindrop, as one source put it.
Yeah, exactly. But as you grow up, you start to realize that raindrop has somehow morphed into this massive inherited boulder of expectation, of moral duty, and maybe most importantly, of silence.
A silence that's passed down through generations.
An obligation that far too often ends up suffocating the very people it's supposed to honor.
That imagery, the boulder and the silence, that's so key.
Yeah.
We're really looking at a system where the questions you need to ask for your own psychological health are often the ones that are just not allowed.
Right.
We have to ask, is this love? Or is it just obedience? Is it genuine gratitude? Or is it, a kind of forced self-erasure? Is it responsibility? Or is it a burden that's just enforced by this crippling fear of what everyone will think?
And because previous generations were so caught up in their own struggles for survival, they just didn't have the language or, frankly, the luxury to ask those questions.
Yeah.
So the whole concept defaults to what our sources call blind filial piety.
Blind filial piety.
Yeah, it's this deep cultural programming that prioritizes the image of obedience over the actual well-being of the child. And it's something that really needs a critical look if the younger generation is ever going to find, genuine peace.
To help us navigate all this, our sources give us this really powerful central metaphor, which I think just perfectly captures the whole conflict. It's the closed door in an old house. And this door, it represents everything: tradition, family history, and all the things we just don't dare to say. The younger generation is described as standing right there, on the threshold.
Trapped.
Exactly, trapped between this rigid, closed past and a future that's waiting for them, a future that demands they be independent.
So our mission today is really practical.
Yeah.
We're going to explore the psychological weight of this whole thing, trace it back to the anxieties of the parental generation, and then, and this is the crucial part, provide an actual actionable toolkit.
A toolkit to help you, the listener, build a new kind of relationship. One that can honor your parents without forcing you to betray yourself. Okay, so let's start by unpacking the burden itself. This idea of absolute obedience. The traditional framework laid out in the sources is not subtle at all.
No, it's completely hierarchical. Parents are the heavens, children are the earth.
Right, and that framing, right out of the gate, it sets up this huge power imbalance.
A massive one. Where any kind of resistance, even just asking a simple question, isn't seen as a normal disagreement between two adults. It's framed as a moral failing.
It's a sin.
A sin against the natural order of things.
Yeah.
The lesson that gets passed down, often without anyone even realizing it, is that there's only one right answer to every big life decision, and that answer always belongs to the parent.
And what's so painful about this is seeing how it plays out in just normal, everyday conversations. It's not some abstract theory. Our sources give these incredibly clear, almost word-for-word examples. Like an adult child says they're unhappy in their job, a job maybe their parents push them into, and the response is just this total dismissal. You don't know anything, just listen.
Ugh, yeah. Or take something even bigger, like an adult trying to gain some basic independence. Maybe they want to move to another city, change their career, or even just choose a partner that the family doesn't approve of.
Right.
The response isn't advice. It's an emotional command tied to morality. Don't be rude. Staying close to us, staying where we can see you, that's what it means to be filial.
That idea of tying physical location to your moral worth, that is an incredibly powerful tool for control.
It weaponizes guilt instantly.
Yeah.
And if you dare to challenge that, if you ask why, then the final conversation ending line comes out.
I gave birth to you, you cannot argue.
That's the one. And it's basically a claim of total ownership over your life, your mind, your future. It just shuts down any possibility of an adult-to-adult discussion.
So the formula becomes brutally simple. Obedience equals filial piety. Enduring your own suffering, sacrificing your own needs, that equals filial piety.
And there's just no room in that script for the child to ask, is this destroying me? Is this even good for my parents in the long run?
And the reason so many people comply is because the cost of not complying is just. It's astronomical. The sources point to this primary fear, and it's not the fear of failure or poverty or not getting a good job.
No, it's something much deeper.
It's the crippling fear of being labeled butthey, unfilial, disrespectful.
And the sources are really stark about this. They say that label is heavier than any other social sentence. Just think about that for a second.
Yeah.
The shame of being seen as disrespectful to your parents is a bigger existential threat than being unemployed or unsuccessful.
Yeah.
It implies you're a failure, not just as an individual, but as a link in the entire generational chain.
It's the ultimate social punishment because it suggests your parents failed to raise a decent human being. And that shame, the fear of what the community will think, is what drives so much of the compliance.
Which is how Haiten stops being a genuine moral value and becomes what the sources call a tool of power.
So how is that tool used? I mean, we're talking about parents who love their children, not villains.
Right, and that's the tragedy. The tool serves a really important purpose for the older generation. It keeps the kids close, physically and emotionally. It lets parents control major life choices, which is crucial for saving face in the community.
But it feels like it goes deeper than just social appearances. It's almost like a way for parents to deal with their own lives.
You're spot on. It's often used to compensate for their own unresolved emotional issues, their own disappointments. It lets them maintain a sense of purpose as their kids grow up and, don't need them in the same way. It becomes a way to deflect all the other pressures in their own lives onto their children's behavior.
This is where the sources bring in some of that stoic and existential philosophy, right? To explain this dynamic.
Precisely. They point out how easily we all confuse love with possession. We think that because we love someone, we have the right to control them. In this family model, it creates this unwritten, unchosen contract.
The contract being, we sacrificed everything to raise you.
Therefore, you must repay us. And that repayment will be measured in one currency and one currency only, your obedience.
And the most painful part is that the child never gets a say. You never get to read the terms and conditions.
You're born into debt. It's a transaction that's disguised as morality. And if you dare to question it, you're not seen as an adult trying to find your own way. You're seen as a moral failure. And that's the heavy weight of that closed door. It keeps you trapped inside.
Okay, understanding that debt is so important. But now, we really have to shift our focus. We need to go behind that closed door and understand where this all comes from. Because as you said, this isn't about parental malice.
Not at all. It comes from a place of deep historical insecurity. From a time when our parents and grandparents just appeared. They didn't have the emotional language we have today.
To really get it, you have to look at the world they grew up in. They lived in an era where survival was everything. The whole idea of individual freedom, of self-discovery, that was a luxury they couldn't even imagine.
I mean, let's get specific about the conditions the source material lays out because it really explains the entire mindset.
Yeah, let's do that.
We're talking about incredible economic hardship, constant scarcity of basic things, unstable jobs, a deeply patriarchal system, and this overwhelming pressure to maintain the family's public reputation they're set in.
On top of that, many were supporting huge extended families with little to no social safety net, no real healthcare system, and for many, there's the added trauma of war or migration.
So their whole focus wasn't on who am I? It was on how do we eat? How do we care for the grandparents? How do we keep this family from falling apart?
In that kind of environment, individual feelings are the first casualty.
Absolutely. So Hautiel wasn't some abstract philosophy to be debated. It was a concrete survival strategy.
Yeah.
It was the set of rules you followed to keep the family unit stable and safe.
Yeah.
Your own soul had to shrink because there just wasn't room for it.
And of course, they just modeled the behavior they grew up with. They inherited this model of supreme parental authority where parents could never, ever be wrong.
They were raised hearing the exact same phrases they use now. You don't know anything, I gave birth to you, it's rude to argue. They learned that the only safe way to exist in the family was to be silent and obedient.
The sources call it an undocumented genetic loop.
Yeah, I love that phrase. It's this behavioral pattern that gets passed down, and no one ever had the psychological tools to stop and say, wait a minute, is this healthy?
So the tragedy is that they often become the very thing they feared as children.
Exactly. Not because they're bad people, but because their society never gave them another way to show love. They only learned the language of control because they were never parented with empathy themselves.
And this all connects back to something you mentioned earlier, the economic reality of children as a form of retirement insurance.
This is maybe the most pragmatic and honestly the most painful root of it all. Without strong pension systems, social insurance, or elder care, the social contract was simple. Your children are your retirement plan.
So Haïtan is not just about respect. It's a mandatory financial and emotional duty. It's payback.
It's a crushing obligation.
Yeah.
You're not just a source of love. You are your parents' future income, their companion against loneliness, their caregiver, and the living proof of their family's honor. The expectation is just immense.
And underneath all that structural pressure is this profound, often unspoken fear of abandonment.
It's the fear of becoming irrelevant. What parents fear most deep down is their children becoming fully independent adults. Because independence means distance, it means self-determination, it means choosing a path that might take them away from that tight family circle.
And that independence feels like a threat.
It feels like an existential threat of being left behind, of losing their main purpose in life. And this fear, it doesn't come out as vulnerability. They don't say, I'm scared of being lonely.
No, they say things like, you're being unfilial.
Exactly. You only care about yourself, or have you forgotten who sacrificed for you? Those aren't statements of fact about the child. They're desperate, unconscious cries of fear. It's a classic psychological dynamic. Unacknowledged fear always turns into control.
We also have to be fair and acknowledge the sacrifices they made were real. They weren't imaginary. Working terrible jobs, giving up their youth.
Absolutely. That sacrifice became their core identity. And as the sources note, that identity became their source of power. The subconscious logic is, I gave my entire life for you, so you owe me. You owe me your obedience to guarantee my safety.
But this is where the sources draw that really sharp, stoic line in the sand.
They remind us that genuine love does not create an invoice. If you sacrifice out of love, the act itself is the reward. You don't demand repayment.
But because their own suffering was so great, that suffering became the currency they used to demand submission.
And when you weaponize your pain to bind someone else, it's no longer a noble sacrifice. It's emotional coercion. And if the child pushes back and says, your suffering doesn't give you the right to control my life, they get hit with the full weight of that Buhi label.
That's the trap.
That is the trap. The debt feels real, but trying to pay it off by erasing yourself is the tragedy. You get punished for trying to become an adult.
So if this whole problem started with the parents' generation and their own history of insecurity, why is it the current generation, the one with all the education and opportunities, that's paying the heaviest psychological price?
Because they are, as the sources put it, the break point. They're the pivot point between tradition and modernity. They're standing right at this existential rupture, and they're feeling the full force of both worlds pulling them apart.
They're the first generation that has the language for this stuff. They have access to psychology, philosophy, concepts of individual rights that their parents just never had. They can actually articulate what feels so wrong.
And being able to articulate it is, ironically, what makes it so painful. There's this great existential quote in the sources that captures it perfectly. The generation that knows how to ask questions is also the generation that pays the price for the wrong answers of the past.
Wow.
They're the first ones to see the system is flawed, and because of that, they're the first ones to really, truly suffer from that awareness.
And that suffering comes from being torn between these two completely incompatible worlds. Behind them, you have tradition, demanding silent obedience, never arguing, giving up your right to live for yourself.
And then ahead of them, you have the modern world, demanding the exact opposite. It demands self-determination, critical thinking, setting boundaries, and crucially, having the right to say no.
It's a kind of generational tragedy.
It really is. They're caught in the middle. And the older generation, the family, the community, they see the young as the designated debt payer.
The debt payer for all the sacrifices, all the lost dreams, all the emotions their parents had to suppress just to survive.
Yes. The young person becomes this unwitting psychological solution for the parents' unhealed wounds. They're forced to fix their parents' mistakes, achieve their unfulfilled dreams, and basically carry the emotional baggage of the entire family. They're not a person, they're a project.
And the paradox, the really bitter part, is that this generation has the vocabulary for it. They know the words: gaslighting, emotional neglect, parentification, guilt tripping.
But here's the irony. Knowing more means hurting more. Because when you try to use that language, when you try to name the injustice and set a boundary, the traditional family structure has no framework for it.
They don't hear, I need a boundary. They hear, I'm being disrespectful.
Exactly. They just double down on the control, labeling you but you or too Western or selfish, you get punished for your own self-awareness.
This also crashes right into the reality of choice. The older generation had so few choices. Life was pretty much laid out for them. But the young generation has a huge array of options for their lives.
And in a system built on control, choice is always seen as a threat. It's a threat to stability. So Hu Tao is used as a chain to stop people from straying. Any personal choice you make is immediately viewed with suspicion. It's labeled as selfish or not thinking about the family.
The objection isn't really about the choice itself, it's about the fact that you dared to choose on your own.
It's the audacity of choosing.
And then you have to layer on the reality of modern burnout. The world today is just. It's incredibly demanding. Housing costs, global competition, job insecurity.
Right.
And yet the parental generation often holds on to the old standard. You have to take care of us the way we took care of our parents. They don't see the massive difference in economic pressure. It's an unfair comparison that leads to this profound sense of exhaustion for the young.
And finally, you have this total collision of emotional languages. The young generation is talking about mental health, about boundaries, about needing space.
Concepts that are completely alien to a generation that was taught that endurance and silent sacrifice were the highest virtues. So when a young person says, "I'm tired," or "I need to protect my mental health," the parents hear a moral failing.
They hear, "You're weak, you're unfilial."
Yeah, it's this huge cultural shift where neither side is speaking the same language, and the kids are left trapped in the middle, feeling the pain and thinking, there must be something wrong with me.
So now we have to look directly at the consequences. How this blind piety becomes a power structure that, as the sources say, leads to a suppressed identity, to guilt poisoning, to living like a shadow in your own family.
The main way this happens is through what we can call conditional love. It's a form of coercion, and it's hidden in that classic phrase, if you truly love your parents, you will do this.
It sounds so loving on the surface.
It does, but behind that phrase are the heaviest demands imaginable. Change your career, marry this person, send this much money home, give up your youth to stay close. And all of these sacrifices are then labeled as acts of love.
Which brings us to that core existential question from the sources. What kind of love needs to be proven by self-erasure?
Right, when love has conditions, when it requires you to stop being you, it's not love anymore, it's control. It turns the family from a safe harbor into what the sources call a marketplace of power.
And the price of belonging is your own self.
Exactly. And the most powerful currency in that marketplace is guilt. Specifically, guilt tied to what other people think.
What will the neighbors think of us if you do that?
That's the one. The child becomes the family's public face, their walking advertisement for parental success. So your personal happiness, your fulfillment, all of it takes a back seat to maintaining the family's honor, their sit-in.
You're forced to wear a mask in the one place you should be able to take it off.
And this is where we have to confront how parental sacrifice gets weaponized. We've said their sacrifices were real, and they were, but they're so often turned into an invoice.
We suffered for you, so you have no right to question us.
Yes, and the sources are really blunt here. A real sacrifice does not give you the right to control another person's future. The younger generation is paying the price not for their parents' love, but for their parents' unhealed pain.
And in this whole system, the child's own feelings are just systematically dismissed.
Completely invalidated. If you're sad or frustrated, you're thinking too much. If you're angry, you're being rude. If you try to set a boundary, you're immediately branded boot.
And when your emotions are denied over and over again, you learn to just stop feeling them, or at least stop showing them.
You learn to dissociate from what you really need. The long-term damage is huge. As the Stoics would say, if you don't know your own emotions, you lose the ability to live your own life.
This all creates an environment where emotional violence is just normalized. It's legitimized under the banner of Hu Tao.
Things that would be called abuse anywhere else are reframed. Control becomes teaching. Constant scolding becomes caring. The silent treatment becomes discipline. Denying your life choices is just knowing what's best for you.
And the real horror isn't just the behavior itself. It's that society often validates it, which silences the child completely.
And that can lead to one of the worst outcomes, which is parentification.
Where the child is forced to become the parent's parent.
Exactly. They become the emotional support system, the financial backer, the marriage counselor. They sacrifice their entire youth to manage their parents' hardships and anxieties. The wound from that is so deep because they never actually get to be a child, so they don't know how to be a healthy adult for themselves.
Which brings us to that final, deepest question. Is what you're feeling for your parents genuine love, or is it just fear?
Fear of that label, fear of guilt, fear of their disapproval. When you can't tell the difference between love and obligation, you know the system is broken. And the whole point of moving forward is to untangle those two things and find a love that is freely chosen.
That idea of untangling, of getting clarity, that's our bridge to the solutions. So now we're going to start building a new framework, drawing on everything from existentialism and stoicism to psychology.
And the very first step, layer 1, has to be making that clear, honest distinction between love and fear. We have to deprogram that cultural math equation where love equals obedience equals filial piety.
Okay, so let's really break down the science from the sources. For you listening, how do you know if what you're doing for your parents comes from a place of genuine love?
The signs of healthy love are about free will. You feel a genuine desire to help, but you do it within your own capacity, emotionally and financially. You feel comfortable and authentic around them. The relationship actually gives you space to grow. You give without resentment because it's a choice.
And what are the signs that you're actually operating out of fear, out of that blind piety?
The signs of fear are heavy. It's that feeling of dread or a weight in your chest when you think about them. It's when you find yourself working just to avoid their disappointment or to avoid that "but he" label.
Your actions feel forced.
Exactly. You're making sacrifices that leave you completely drained, physically and mentally, and you can't even talk about it because you have to keep the peace. If an action is consistently making you feel suffocated or like you're losing yourself, the sources are clear. That is fear disguised as morality.
So layer 2 is taking that clarity and applying it to the concept itself, redefining healthy versus blind Huthem.
Right. We have to move past this false choice that says filial piety has to mean submission. Healthy piety is about conscious, mature effort. It's about respect and care. But, and this is the key within your capacity, it's about honest communication and protecting your boundaries to secure your own future. It is maturity over submission.
Whereas blind piety is the opposite. It's self-erasure, sacrificing your youth, being terrified of saying no, living out your parents' dreams, and basically destroying your own life to meet their needs.
And this brings us to layer 3, which is a major mindset shift. The mission for the current generation is healing, not debt repayment.
Let's be really direct about this.
We have to be. You do not owe your parents for the poverty they endured, for their lack of emotional education, or for the cultural pressures they faced. That is not your debt to pay.
Their history is not your invoice.
Exactly. Your mission, as the sources frame it, is to heal the generational line. You do that by stopping the toxic patterns, by living honestly, and by creating a healthier future for the next generation. Your job isn't to repay an imaginary debt, it's to stop passing down the trauma.
To make that kind of huge shift, you need practical tools. Let's start with the Stoic tool, redefining control.
Stoicism is perfect for this kind of family chaos. It teaches you to focus only on what you can actually control. You cannot control if your parents will ever change. You can't control if they'll understand your boundaries or if they'll react defensively.
So what can you control?
Your reaction, your calmness, your commitment to your own values, and how you calmly and clearly set and enforce your boundaries. The practical application is this: set a limit, communicate it briefly, and then follow through, whether they approve or not. Acceptance is a bonus, not a requirement.
And the second tool is from the existentialists, defining your minimum freedom.
Existentialism is all about the freedom to be human. You have to identify your red line. What is the absolute minimum you need to not lose yourself? Maybe it's financial freedom, the choice of where you live, the freedom to say no.
And this is the line you have to defend no matter what.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because if you give up that core autonomy, you lose the ability to love in a healthy way. A person who isn't free can only obey. And someone who only obeys can't truly give love, they can only comply.
This framework leads us perfectly into the practical toolkit. This is the step-by-step guide to actually implementing these ideas, focusing on the internal shift first and then the external actions, all while trying to manage the family friction.
Okay, so step 1 is clear identification. You have to separate the actions that bind you from the ones that are benign.
And the sources suggest a pretty simple exercise for this, right? Like a 3-column list.
Exactly. Column A, things I do out of genuine voluntary love. Column B, things I do out of fear of being labeled but-he, fear of guilt, fear of shame. And then column C, the cost of that action: loss of sleep, resentment, feeling suffocated.
And if the things in column B are consistently leading to the costs in column C,
then you have your proof. You're acting out of fear, not love. This step is just about getting objective clarity so you can stop blaming yourself for being exhausted.
Step 2, define your minimum freedom. That red line we just talked about, this is where you actually write it down.
Yes. Write down the 3 to 5 most essential things you need for your own adult life. The freedom to choose my career, the freedom to live where I want, the freedom to manage my own finances. This is your non-negotiable list.
Step 3 is the big behavioral change. Learn the language of boundaries. And the mantra is short, calm, repeat. This is where a lot of people get stuck.
They do, because we're conditioned to either over-explain or just explode with anger. The key here is to do neither. Short sentences with no long justifications that just give them something to argue with. A calm tone, because anger just confirms their belief that you're being disrespectful. And you repeat the exact same phrase when they push. Consistency is your power, not arguing.
Okay, let's role play this. A classic scenario. A parent is demanding you give them money that's beyond your budget. What do you say?
They say, "We need this money, you have to give it to us." You calmly respond, "I can't do that right now, but I can offer this amount." When they get emotional and say, "After all we sacrificed for you, you're being so unfilial," you just repeat the boundary.
Without getting angry.
Without getting angry. "I understand, but this is my financial boundary." You don't engage with the emotional manipulation. You just keep restating the boundary calmly.
What about social pressure? You have to come to this dinner, what will the relatives think?
Same technique. "I appreciate the invitation, but I won't be able to make it." When they push back with, "You're embarrassing us," you say, "I understand you're concerned about that, but I've already made my plans." You hold the line without needing their approval. You're forcing them to deal with you as an adult.
Okay, step 4 is a psychological one, separate from the perfect child role.
We all know this role. Always polite, always agreeable. But playing that role costs you yourself. You have to accept that you cannot be the perfect child, and just as importantly, they cannot be the perfect parents. You're just two imperfect people trying to figure it out.
And the question to ask yourself is, if I weren't anyone's child, how would I want to live my life?
That question creates psychological distance. It helps you see the difference between the life that's expected of you and the life you actually want to own.
Step 5 is about action. Build the habit of not asking permission.
This is such a subtle but powerful shift. So many adults stay stuck because they're still asking for permission for their own life choices. And when you ask for permission, you're handing the decision-making power right back to your parents.
So you shift from asking to informing.
Exactly. Instead of, "Mom, Dad, can I move out?" you say, "I've signed a lease and I'm moving on Saturday. I'll call you when I'm settled." You're not asking. You're informing them of a decision you, as an adult, have already made.
Step 6 is the foundation for all of this. Build financial freedom. Without it, all of this is just theory.
Financial dependence is the ultimate control mechanism. Your ability to say no is directly tied to your ability to take care of yourself.
So the goal isn't to get rich, it's to get stable.
It's stability. A steady income, an emergency fund they can't touch, and no financial debt to the family. When you become financially independent, the entire power dynamic in the family shifts. Respect often follows competence.
And finally, step 7. Build a full, separate life, a new psychological home for yourself.
This means building resilience through things that are yours alone. Your own job, your own home, your own friends, your own values. When your life is full, you're no longer dependent on your family for your sense of self-worth.
And that security is what lets you go back and love them without fear.
That's it. You can love them freely because your identity is no longer on the line. And that fullness, that independence, is the foundation of a truly healthy, mature, filial piety. So with all those tools in place, we can finally move toward a real reconciliation. This is about looking forward and defining what a new, healthy haihutan actually looks like.
And the first step here is a big one. See parents as human. It sounds so simple, but in a culture that often deifies parents, it's revolutionary.
We have to move past seeing them as either saints or villains. They're just complex people. People who are caught between different eras, who never got an emotional education, and who are carrying their own inherited trauma. We have to see their insecurity and fear as the real drivers of their need for control.
Why is that so important?
Because that awareness creates psychological space. It's not about forgiving or excusing bad behavior. It's about being able to set a boundary without being crushed by guilt. When you see them as flawed human beings, you can process your own pain without getting stuck in anger.
Step 2. Stop playing the victim of the past. You have to acknowledge what happened, but you can't let it define who you are now.
This is the big existential challenge. You are not defined by what happened to you. You are defined by what you choose to do next. If you stay in that victim mindset, you can't build a new life. The greatest act of freedom is to choose to stop the cycle and become the author of your own story.
Step 3 is a really interesting reframing. Shift from repayment by submission to repayment by maturity.
Parents control because they're afraid. They're afraid you'll fail or afraid you'll leave them. Deep down, what they unconsciously need is to see that you are a competent, stable adult. They need proof that you'll be okay.
So when you actually become that stable, self-sufficient adult who can set calm boundaries, their anxiety goes down.
It naturally decreases. Not because you gave them a psychology lesson, but because you've removed the source of their biggest worry. Showing them you can thrive on your own is the most effective and truest form of filial piety.
Step 4 is about communication skills. Use non-resistant, non-submissive dialogue.
This is the stoic way of communicating. You avoid any language that sounds like "you're wrong" or "I reject you."
Instead, you validate their concern without giving up your decision.
Exactly. When they criticize your career choice, you say something like, "I understand you're worried this is risky, and I know you want the best for me, but this is my decision and I take full responsibility for it." You're speaking to them as an adult, which forces them to respond to you as one.
Step 5 is a really insightful exercise. Create an emotional family tree.
You need to map the inherited pain, trace the fear, the misunderstanding of sacrifice, the cultural pressure. Trace it from your grandparents to your parents to you. When you do that, you see that the pain didn't start with your parents. They were just one link in a long chain.
And that frees you from self-blame.
It lets you realize that you're the first link in that chain who has the tools and the awareness to actually fix the errors. You're not the mistake. You're the repairer.
And finally, step 6, focus on the future, not the past.
If you just dwell on the past, on how you were hurt, you get stuck in anger and resentment. But if you focus on the future, how do I make sure the next generation doesn't go through this? Then you move into action and healing and growth. True freedom is about choosing your future, not being trapped by your past. So after this whole deep dive, we can finally define what this new sustainable model of Hutan looks like for our generation. It's built on freedom, awareness, and maturity.
There are 5 pillars to this, right?
5 non-negotiable pillars. First, pillar 1 is freedom. The basic recognition that adult children are independent individuals. Without freedom, you can't have true love or real piety. You can only have compliance.
Okay, what's number 2?
Pillar 2 is responsibility for one's own life. This is the adult contract. You don't blame your parents for your failures, you don't stay dependent on them, and you don't expect them to pay for your choices. That's real maturity.
Pillar 3.
Pillar 3 is respecting parental limits. This is about accepting that our parents are imperfect. We can't demand that they suddenly become emotionally enlightened or that they change overnight.
Pillar 4.
Pillar 4 is unconditional affection. This means loving them by choice, not by obligation. We care for them, but we do it without becoming their emotional slaves or letting ourselves be manipulated by guilt.
And the final one, pillar 5.
Pillar 5 is building a healthier next generation. This is the ultimate goal. True filial piety isn't about blindly following old, broken models. It's about having the courage to stop the cycle of pain and build something better for the future.
So at the end of the day, the reconciliation the sources offer is just profoundly human. We're not perfect children, they are not saints. But we can choose to be decent, mature human beings to each other.
Right.
Hayotao can stop being this heavy chain and it can become a new kind of freedom. The freedom to love without fear, to care without erasing yourself, and to walk together without one person disappearing into the other's shadow.
Which brings us right back to where we started. That closed door of the old house. It doesn't need to be smashed down in anger. It just needs to be open, calmly, maturely. Not so you can run away from your past, so you can step into a real adult relationship with it. Moving from fear to honest engagement, where your future story is finally written by you, built on freedom and real mutual love. That is how a tradition truly evolves.